Could a few incredibly small rifle cartridges actually trigger one of the most massive rebellions in the history of British India? We're talking about an empire-shaking uprising here, millions of lives permanently altered, and it was all seemingly ignited by something you could literally hold in the palm of your hand.
To figure that out, let's set the scene. It's 1857, and the British East India Company essentially controls a massive chunk of the Indian subcontinent. It's this era of just absolute, total corporate domination. But beneath the surface of this incredibly powerful empire, a really deep, unseen anger is steadily boiling. The tension on the ground was palpable. It was just waiting for a spark.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the Indian Rebellion of 1857, which is also widely known as the First War of Independence. It's a really complex, bloody, and genuinely fascinating story of how a massive uprising unfolded against what seemed like an untouchable empire. Let's dive in.
But to really understand the explosion, we've got to look at the powder keg first, right? Because this kind of anger doesn't just appear overnight. First up, you had the doctrine of lapse. This was a hugely controversial policy where the British would just simply annex Indian states if a ruler died without a recognized male heir. Then came the economic devastation. British policies were heavily taxing farmers and completely crushing traditional local craftsmen. And finally, you have the military. Indian soldiers, known as sepoys, made up a massive part of the company's army. Yet they faced really harsh discrimination, unfair promotion policies, and totally unequal pay compared to the British troops. The resentment was massive.
So you've got political erasure, crippling economic hardship, and severe military mistreatment. I mean, the conditions were literally perfect for a fire. All they needed was the trigger. And that trigger came in the form of the brand new Enfield rifle cartridges. Rumors started spreading like wildfire among the sepoys that these specific cartridges were greased with a mixture of cow and pig fat. Now, here's the catch. To load the rifle, a soldier had to literally bite the cartridge open. For Hindu soldiers, the cow is sacred. For Muslim soldiers, the pig is forbidden. So regardless of what the grease was actually made of, the reality on the ground was that this forced the tension to finally snap. Now, resistance was already bubbling up in places like Barrackpore. Think of figures like Mangal Pandey, but the absolute breaking point hits in May. Soldiers who flat out refused to bite these cartridges were brutally punished by the British. They were stripped of their uniforms, shackled. The humiliation of it all just pushed the sepoys over the edge. The anger reached a total fever pitch. Which brings us directly to Meerut. On the 10th of May, 1857, Indian soldiers openly rebel. And they didn't just refuse orders. They broke their imprisoned comrades out, grabbed their weapons, and started a historic march. Their destination? The heart of the old empire. And the speed of this? It's terrifyingly fast. Following that mutiny on May 10th, these rebels are marching into Delhi within weeks. From there, it's a complete chain reaction across northern and central India, quickly engulfing major centers like Kanpur, Lucknow, and Jhansi. Practically overnight, it transforms from a localized mutiny into a sprawling, full-blown rebellion. Capturing Delhi wasn't just a random choice either. It was incredibly strategic. If you're going to overthrow a deeply entrenched ruling power like the East India Company, you need legitimacy. You need a central, unifying political symbol to rally the rest of the vast subcontinent behind you. And they found that exact symbol in Bahadur Shah Zafar, the elderly last Mughal emperor. Now sure, he didn't have much actual military power at this point in history, but his name carried centuries of weight. By placing him right at the helm, Delhi instantly becomes the nerve center of the entire uprising. But here's the really fascinating part. This movement wasn't just some faceless wave of anger, and it wasn't solely directed from Delhi. It was driven by distinct, powerful, and fiercely independent leaders across different regions who basically said enough is enough and took up the mantle of resistance. Just look at the diversity of this leadership. Beyond Bahadur Shah Zafar and Delhi, you have fierce leaders stepping up everywhere. In Kanpur, Nana Sahib leads the charge. Over in Lucknow, Begum Hazrat Mahal takes command on behalf of her young son. In Jhansi, you have the legendary Rani Lakshmibai fighting incredibly fiercely against British forces. Down in Bihar, the elderly Kuwar Singh fights brilliantly, while in central India, Tantia Tope emerges as an absolute master military commander. These are the faces that turned a mutiny into a full-scale war. We do have to look at the other side of this, though, because the entire Indian subcontinent did not actually rise up all at once.
Some regions remained completely peaceful. And once that initial shock wore off, the British East India Company, now backed by the full weight of the British government, began organizing a massive and quite brutal counterattack.
Because as powerful as the resistance was, it had some fatal flaws. First off, there was no single overarching command structure. You had local leaders with conflicting local objectives. Plus, the rebels had severely limited resources compared to the highly organized military supplies of the British. Crucially, not every Indian state joined the fight. Some even actively supported the British. And ultimately, the British were able to heavily reinforce their positions with fresh troops brought in from outside India. That totally tipped the scales.
Because of that, the timeline of defeat is rapid and tragic. By September 1857, just months after it was captured, Delhi falls back to the British after a grueling siege. The rebel centers are slowly, systematically recaptured. In June 1858, Rani Lakshmibai dies in fierce combat. Commanders like Tantia Tope keep up a desperate guerrilla resistance for a while. But by late 1858, the major organized military resistance is definitively defeated.
So, 1858 marks the end of the heavy bloodletting. But the sheer gravity of what had just happened, you just couldn't ignore it. The military rebellion had failed to kick the British out, but the immense scale of the uprising changed the fundamental structure of India forever. The status quo was completely shattered. I mean, just look at this massive shift in power. Before 1857, you literally have a private corporation largely governing a subcontinent. The rebellion proved that was completely unsustainable. Through the Government of India Act of 1858, the British government steps in and strips the company of its rule. Authority is transferred directly to the crown. India officially becomes a formal colony. And with that harsh new reality comes the quiet, really tragic end to an ancient power. The Mughal dynasty, which had ruled parts of India for centuries, is effectively erased. Bahadur Shah Zafar, the symbolic heart of the rebellion, is captured, tried for treason, and exiled to Rangoon, never to return. The events of those 2 years permanently reshaped the globe. So, what do you think? Was this simply a failed military revolt, crushed by a far superior force? Or, in its ashes, was it the vital first symbol of nationwide resistance, a unified memory that laid the groundwork for India's long march to independence? The power structures changed for sure, but that spark ignited in Meerut, it would never truly be extinguished.